So I wanted to talk a little bit about long-term player development and where that fits with person-centered coaching. It's something that I'm quite passionate about in terms of how I coach. So anybody that's coached with me, coached alongside me, will know that my journey's been a very short process in the grand scheme of things, but actually the building blocks have been from the bottom all the way up. So a bit about me. I did my level 1 as a parent that was just going to help out my son's team, and literally fell in love with coaching. I think it was just destiny. I was supposed to take over that team, and it was just what was supposed to be for me. Very quickly went on and did my level 2, and then not long after that went on and did the UEFA B. And in the middle of all that, I chucked in a futsal course as well. Off the back of my passion for football, I thought I'd go and get a qualification at university. So I studied with Lincoln College, and I'm studying sports coaching, education and development, and I'm in my 2nd year of that course. I'm also the foundation phase lead over at Lincoln United. So I'm looking after the wee tots of our club. As part of that journey, I wrote a paper on sports for my sports coaching, education and development course on long-term athlete development, which kind of got me thinking. And I appreciate that the FA, you can only fit so much in within the courses. So it does briefly touch on this when you go through your coaching qualifications, but it's something that I have thought long and hard about since reading a bit further into it. My disclaimer, love a disclaimer, as does every coach that I've presented with. Everyone's an individual, coaches included, and all the models are left open to interpretation. Sometimes that can be the downfall of the model. This is how I use the model, and what I discuss will be mostly my interpretation and the things that I've taken away from the research that I've read, and from my own experiences, really. So what do we think long-term development is? Lots of people talk about getting better over a period of time in whatever it is that you're doing. But the model itself, the long-term athlete development model, thinks more about the player from the beginning to the end and the blocks that are in between that. It's used worldwide. It's become quite a well-known model, and lots of people have adopted it. Not forgetting Canada. Canada wholeheartedly bought into the Ltid model and have had quite a lot of success in terms of sport over that. And you only have to go back and look at their 2012 Olympics record to see the development that they've made using this model. So it's a bit strange that there's not that much research when you think about a long-term effect of what this is doing. We can see the results, but nobody's really done some heavy research into the importance. So thinking about it then, actually what we're trying to do is develop a lifetime love for the sport, or for being active in general. I'm sure that you've all had players that have come to you and gone over the years, but have gone away maybe into a different sport. If you're coaching football, they've maybe just taken it up in a different format, if they've been at an academy, but then they've gone off and gone back into grassroots. Take players through a program that usually improves them continually. That's important. We do want to think about improving people. And it looks at stages of development and stages that are right for the person in terms of where they are in their journey. So this is the model in its basic form. We start with active start down there at the bottom in red. And you can see that's the same for boys and girls from age 0 to 6. Then we move on to the fundamentals, into learning to train, training to train, training to compete, and then eventually training to win. What I thought was interesting is if you go down most fields that are full on haven't been for some time, but would normally be full of grassroots players, how many coaches in the younger age groups are already trying to train to win? I think it's important to understand that we're jumping into that too quickly. When you go on your courses, the FA, they talk about it quite a lot, and it's really important, but I don't think that we necessarily grasp it as well as we could in terms of how it can be hindering their development. So I think it's really, really important that we think about this model and where our players fit within that. So when we're looking at active start, right down there at the bottom, what we're actually looking to do is create the fun and just get moving. Then when we move on to the fundamentals, that's when we're trying to build the basics. And we're really trying to learn your agility, coordination, balance, that should all be being developed in that stage. Learning to train, again, really important. We're acquiring skills that we need. And I think that fits nicely with what Craig was saying is, if you're trying to commit to somebody, you've got to teach them how to be committed in sport. They're not necessarily going to know. So that's an important part. Training to train. So I actually work with a under 13s team at the moment. And at the minute, this is the biggest thing that I'm looking at is training to train. So them understanding what they're doing to their bodies, why they're turning up to training, what we're trying to commit to, and not focusing so much on results, because as I've always said, and I've always said to them, we're not here to win the under 13s league. I want to go on with that team and go on to under 18. So how do I do that? Well, I do that by following this process. When we look at it a bit further and a bit closer then, you can see at the top of the page, there's the chronological age. And so everybody within a school year is maybe at a different stage of this, because I'm an August baby. I was always the youngest in my class, because that's where the cutoff is. And then my friends were always much older than me, so developed in some aspects much quicker than me. Then there's the training age. So that's specifically how long you've been doing your sport. You can see it's quite complex, and actually it changes for females and males. And that's something that we need to take into consideration. So some coaches will go off, for example, myself, I've coached both female only and mixed. I might take an age group that I'm already coaching in the mixed groups and need to slightly adjust, because that's not where my female only group are. And that comes with understanding where they are in their development. And I think understanding the LTAD model will help be able to plan for that much better. There's also the consideration of their physical, mental and cognitive states and their emotional states, because that might change this. For example, if when you're in the learning to train stage, you have something that affects your emotional development, that's going to have an impact on the other parts of your development. So I wanted to come up with some scenarios that we could consider, and by considering them, understand the model maybe a little bit better in terms of how it's relevant to us. So if we had a player age 10 come to a session who's never played structured football, what are we going to consider? Well, for a start, their training age there is not going to be the same as other people within the session. They'll have missed those fundamental stages in terms of football. However, we don't know whether they've been gaining them elsewhere. So there's lots of different things that we can consider there. On to the next one. A player age 10 breaks their leg at school. That can be massive. Same age, they've already gone through that fundamental skills. What if they're out? What if they have complications and they're out for a whole season? What if they're out and they, the next season they don't feel they can come back, but eventually they build up the confidence to come back? I've had this happen. I had a brother of one of my players wanted to play but could never get himself back comfortable to go and play. He missed 5 seasons of football, eventually has gone back. He built up his confidence doing things like becoming a referee, supporting me in a junior coaching role, and he's gone back to playing football. But there's all these considerations, because then by the time he's gone back to play football, he's obviously had such a big break. He's missed quite a lot of the LTAD model in its form. So a player age 13 is our next one. He's been playing in another sport. They want to come and play football. They're coming because they want to play with their friends. What do we need to consider? Well, they've already been through this model, perhaps not football specific, but they've already been through that model. So we need to think about that and what that impact that's going to have. So where does person-centered coaching fit? I adore a person-centered coaching approach simply because that's the kind of person I am. I'm not the most technical of coaches. That's my biggest area that I work on quite a lot as part of my personal development. However, person-centered approaches is my forte. So I always try and ask myself, am I seeing the player or am I seeing the person? And whenever I'm working with coaches as a mentor, that's one of the big, I keep coming back to that question. Are we seeing the player or are we seeing the person? What's best for them? What else have they got going on? All those things that we can look around. Is there something wrong in their family life? Is there something wrong at school? Is there something happening that we can support with that's maybe changing the way that they're training, changing their needs in terms of what style of coaching we're going to use? There's lots of areas that we can work on when it comes to person-centered coaching. But where does it fit with the LTAD model? So you'll recognize this as the four-corner model, and I've put some of the most common ones in there. But the four-corner model can be applied to all players, regardless of age or ability. And we can change this up as much as we need it. And within a session, we should always be considering the four-corner model and planning around that. Does it mean that everybody in your session has to be at the same level? Does it mean they need to be of the same training age? Does it mean they need to be in the same part of their the LTAD model? I would suggest not. However, we do need to take that into consideration. So if we think about our player age 13 who's been off playing another sport, what are the things that we need to consider? Well, we're not going to have to worry about their commitment and control necessarily, because they will have learned that and gained some skills in another area, but their confidence might have changed because it's a new sport. They're not necessarily going to be achieving winning performances because they're not necessarily going to have the strengths yet when it comes to football to be able to do so, but they might. Understand and apply individual, unit and team roles and responsibilities. So if you've got somebody who's just come from, for example, rugby, they might have a basic understanding of what you're going to ask, but they might not necessarily have a deeper understanding, certainly as you get up through the age groups. And so we need to make sure that we take into consideration when we're looking at that player that's going to be lacking and how we can plan for that. They might perform effectively in some games because of the way that they're matched, but then they might not. Some formations might suit them because of the style of play that they've gained from playing rugby, for example, and some might not, while we work with this player and develop them. What about the physical side then? Is there anything we need to consider in the physical side? Are those things going to be missing? Well, that's questionable. Sometimes they might be able to transfer those skills quite easily, depending on the person. Other times they might find that they're losing a bit of their agility because the turns are a bit different. If they've come from cricket, for example, their agility, balance and coordination is going to have been used in a different way. So they might be regaining some confidence with that. Teamwork. In the social corner, teamwork is going to be very different in rugby, in cricket, compared to football. And independence. If you take somebody who's been really strong in another sport and they come into your sport, and all of a sudden they're not the most independent within the group, what is that going to do to them as a person? And I think if we go back to the model and we think about a player that's coming in new, especially if you're looking a bit further up where they're 11, 12, and we should never rule these people out, but we need to remember that they've missed out on the fundamentals. They might have missed out on the fundamentals if their school's not particularly good with PE and it's the first time doing sport. They might be way off in their fundamentals, but does that mean that they can't get there? No. Does it mean that you're going to have to spend some time considering that? Absolutely. But does that mean that they're not worthy of a place on the team? Not necessarily. I think that all depends on your perception and obviously your setup. I think it's really important that we consider what we're doing and what we're saying to these people, because maybe they don't fit in your team, but they're going to fit somewhere. You know, we wanting to develop a player that falls in love with football forever. That's what long-term development of a player is. And so whether that's within your team or within somebody else's team, then we need to make sure that we're trying to, even if they're with us for 6 months, knowing we're going to pass them on, or we say, you know, you're not necessarily right for my team, but, you know, train with me until we can find you somewhere, then I think we still need to be considering these things, because all of a sudden you start considering where they are in terms of their development across the LTAD model, their training age, their chronological age, and you start to build up a bigger picture. It's a lot more than just he's 11, so he's playing under 12s. We need to really think about that. I've had players that physically have been much bigger than the players of their own age group, so I've asked them to play up a year. Why? Because physically they weren't able to work on some of these things. They weren't achieving some of these things because they were so much bigger than the other children that they weren't able to practice things to a good enough standard, and that's done them a world of good. That player's now returned to their own age group and is much more suited. So it's about being flexible, and sometimes we have to ask ourselves the question, are our leagues set up to be flexible like that? Because you can play up a year, you can't play down. Would some people benefit from playing down a year? I think certainly when you think about the long-term development of a player, especially when they're coming in, you know, maybe a bit further up and they've missed those elements, that yes, that would be the right thing to do. But do the leagues allow us to do that? Not necessarily. So I'm hoping that I've given you some food for thought, and that there's some things that you can take away from that and think about that will change the way you plan, change the way you see player development, and certainly long term. And if you want to go away, you can Google long-term athlete development, and there is so much to read about it. Hopefully I've sparked an interest in that.